The ancient sword stood embedded in stone at the heart of the ruined temple. It was a relic of legend, its blade shimmering under the ethereal glow of the floating runes that encircled it. Generations had tried and failed to remove it, for it was said that only the chosen one could claim the blade and wield its power. Silra watched from the shadows, her sharp elven eyes twinkling with amusement. She had seen countless warriors attempt to pull the sword, each walking away humiliated. They came with pride and left with despair, and it was always entertaining. This time, the hopeful fool was a human, a young man with an air of quiet determination, his clothes simple and his hands rough from labor rather than combat. She stepped forward, letting her presence be known with the light tapping of her boots against the ancient stone floor. "Ah, another dreamer," she mused, her melodic voice dripping with condescension. "What makes you think you'll succeed where kings and heroes have failed?" The man turned toward her, his deep brown eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. Determination, perhaps, but also patience. He did not answer her taunt. Instead, he placed his hands on the hilt of the sword and pulled. Nothing happened. Silra laughed, the sound like the chime of silver bells. "How predictable! And yet you tried so earnestly. Did you think your human strength alone would move it?" The man said nothing, simply rolling his shoulders and tightening his grip. He pulled again. Still, the sword remained unmoved, as it always had. Silra folded her arms, enjoying the sight. "Shall I fetch you a hammer? Or perhaps a ladder? That way, you can at least pretend to have done something impressive before you leave in disgrace." The man exhaled through his nose, closing his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them, and for the first time, a glint of something unfamiliar flickered in his gaze. He adjusted his stance, spreading his feet apart as if grounding himself deeper into the earth. His hands curled tighter around the hilt, his fingers pressing into the worn leather grip. Then he pulled. The air in the temple shifted. The floating runes, dormant for centuries, pulsed with light. The stone beneath the sword cracked, splitting like dry earth under a heavy footstep. A low hum resonated through the chamber, growing in intensity until the entire structure seemed to vibrate with unseen energy. Silra's laughter died in her throat. With a final, determined yank, the sword broke free. The ancient blade, untouched for millennia, gleamed as if freshly forged. The air around it shimmered with raw power, and the temple walls trembled as if acknowledging its return to the world. The man held it aloft, staring at the weapon as if he too could not believe what had just happened. Silra took an involuntary step back, her heartbeat quickening. That's impossible," she whispered, her hands clenched at her sides, fingers twitching as if she wanted to reach for her own weapon but knew it would be useless. The man turned toward her, the sword now resting at his side. His expression was unreadable, but a small smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "You were saying?" Silra swallowed. You must have cheated. There's no way you, no human, could do this. And yet, here we are." She couldn't comprehend it. The sword was bound by an ancient enchantment, one meant to be unbreakable except by the destined one. The elves had spent centuries researching its origins, crafting theories and tests to determine what kind of being could wield it. But never had they considered that a mere human would succeed. He ran his fingers along the blade, and the runes etched into the steel flared to life, casting an eerie glow across his face. "I don't feel any different," he admitted. I don't know, that something would happen." Silra narrowed her eyes. "Maybe it takes time, or maybe you're simply too dull to notice the power flowing through you." He chuckled, the sound warm despite her sharp words. "Or maybe I was just strong enough to pull it." Her ears twitched. "Strength has nothing to do with it. The enchantment was supposed to react to destiny, to the soul, not brute force. Then I suppose you'll just have to figure out why it worked for me. He turned away, casually swinging the sword a few times to test its weight. Because I intend to keep it. Silra bristled. You think I'll just let you walk away with a weapon of legend? That sword belongs to history, not to some wandering human. You're welcome to try and take it, he said, flashing her a grin. But something tells me that wouldn't go well for you. Her hands twitched toward the daggers at her waist, but she hesitated. She wasn't certain anymore. The man before her was still just a human, but something had shifted. The temple itself seemed to acknowledge his claim, the once dormant energy of the chamber now pulsing with life at his presence. If she attacked him, would the sword respond? Would it strike her down before she even got close? She exhaled sharply and crossed her arms. Fine, keep it, but don't think this is over. That sword's power is beyond mortal comprehension. If you think you can wield it without consequence, you're a bigger fool than I thought. The man sheathed the sword, not in some ornate scabbard, but in a simple leather loop at his belt. Then I suppose we'll find out. As he turned to leave, Silra found herself watching him with newfound interest. She had come here expecting another failure, another moment of amusement at the expense of a hopeful warrior. Instead, she had witnessed something impossible. And, she realized with a start, she wasn't quite sure if she was more intrigued or afraid. She followed him. At first, she told herself it was to keep an eye on him, to ensure he didn't misuse the sword's power. But as the days passed, she found herself drawn to the mystery of him. Who was he? Where had he come from? And how had he done what so many others, including the greatest of elves, had failed to do? Their journey took them through dense forests and across vast plains. They encountered creatures that recoiled at the sight of the sword and others that watched with wary reverence. The sword itself remained silent, offering no hint of the power it held within. One night, as they camped beneath the stars, Silra finally spoke the question that had been plaguing her. "What is your name?" The man looked at her, surprised by the sudden shift in her tone. "Callum," she nodded, rolling the name over in her mind. Simple, unassuming, and yet it now belonged to the one who had done the impossible. "Callum," she repeated, staring into the fire. "I think I hate you." He laughed softly. "That makes two of us." And yet, neither of them made a move to part ways.